Hello. You always thought the Olympic Games were all about triumph, strength, glory, and willpower, but you were wrong. The very first Olympics, those were dust, blood, and exhaustion, foul sweat and endless thirst, raw disappointment, and the silent fear of the gods who watched you only out of curiosity. But before you get comfortable, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is there. I'm really curious to see who's joined us. Now, settle in and get comfortable. We're starting. You wake up in ancient Hellas, not modern Greece, with its sunburnt tourists and street vendors who will chase you half a block for trying to bargain too hard over feta. Not even the picturesque ruins you once glimpsed in a faded travel magazine. No, you have woken up somewhere near the dusty beginnings, an awkward little gap in time before someone had the idea to call this era history, and after someone else decided to call your straw mat a bed. Your eyes open slowly, as if eyelids in this century are heavier, and your first thought is not philosophical nor poetic. It is the simple recognition that your mouth tastes like a mixture of goat's milk and regret. The air, thick with the scent of sheep, earth, and bodies that have never known the blessing of soap, is the first sign that you are not dreaming. The hut in which you sleep is shared by three others. Menes, who snores as if auditioning for the part of an angry thunder god. Cleon, who sleeps with one arm flung over his face, as though shielding himself from the horrors of daylight, and Theodoros, who is already awake, muttering to himself and meticulously counting the olives in a cracked clay bowl. You do not know why Theodorus counts olives every morning, but you suspect it is the closest thing this world has to meditation. There are no clocks here, only the slow, relentless passage of sunlight across the dirt floor. Somewhere outside, a rooster crows, not with the theatrical enthusiasm of the roosters you remember from children's books, but with the exhausted resignation of a creature who has crowed every morning for 100 years and has no reason to think. This one will be different. You rise from your bed, a term you use generously, since it is composed of straw, two thin blankets, and the vague hope that tonight you will not roll onto a pebble. As you do so, you are struck by the realization that you have no idea what your purpose is here beyond survival. In this world, there is no Wi-Fi, no coffee, no polite conversations about networking and synergy. There is only the day ahead, heavy with the promise of sweat, sand, and possibly glory. You step outside into the weak morning light. The village is already alive in that peculiar, determined way that only places built entirely by hand can be. Women bend over fires, stirring pots of something that looks and smells like boiled disappointment. Men argue over the correct way to patch a thatched roof, their voices rising and falling with the rhythm of the cicadas. Children, who seem to have been born covered in dust, chase each other around the ankles of a goat that is so thin you can count its ribs without trying. You remember, vaguely, that you have come to participate in the first Olympic Games. Not the ones with sleek stadiums and sponsor logos and medals that get melted down into keychains. No, these games are different. They are, according to the elders, sacred. They are dedicated to the gods, who, it seems, have little better to do than watch mortals trip over their own feet in the blazing sun. The elders tell stories, always beginning with, "In the time of our fathers," about past games where men prove themselves worthy of memory, or at the very least, worthy of a free meal at the temple. You, apparently, are here to add your steps to that long, dusty parade. The road to Olympia is not much of a road. It is a suggestion, a direction. You follow the others, mostly men with shoulders like granite and expressions like people who have never laughed on purpose, past groves of olive trees and fields where the wheat has given up hope of ever being harvested. You notice with mild horror that you are the only one wearing sandals that could charitably be described as well used. The others are barefoot, their feet so calloused they could probably stomp out a fire without blinking. As you walk, the elders recount the sacred rules of the games. You are told repeatedly that all participants must swear an oath before Zeus himself not to cheat, not to bribe, and not to bring disgrace upon their city state. These rules are repeated so many times that you suspect the real challenge of the Olympics is simply remembering them all. You finally arrive at Olympia, which is less a city than a collection of tents, statues, and nervous energy. Everywhere you look, there are men preparing, stretching, arguing, or staring at nothing in particular with the intensity of someone reconsidering every life decision they have ever made. You are given a place to sleep, straw again, with an extra blanket as a token of hospitality. You are told to rest, but your mind is already racing, considering what the day will bring. Night falls, the fires crackle. Somewhere, someone recites a hymn to Zeus, his voice cracking with either reverence or exhaustion. It is difficult to tell which. You lie awake, listening to the unfamiliar symphony of ancient life, the shuffling of feet, the murmur of prayers, the distant laughter of those who have not yet learned to fear the morning. As you drift towards sleep, you realize with the cold certainty of someone who cannot escape their own fate. Tomorrow, you will step onto the ancient soil where history itself will be written. Whether you will be its author or merely a footnote remains to be seen. You sleep, if you can call it that, knowing that when you wake, you will not be in a dream, but in the slow, relentless process of becoming history, one awkward step at a time. You wake up before the sun. This, you have learned, is not because ancient Greeks are virtuous, but because the air is slightly less oppressive before the heat comes. You lie there for a moment, staring at the thatched ceiling and listening to the chorus of snores, coughs, and the ever present hum of insects. There is a moment, just a sliver of time, when you imagine yourself back in a soft bed with no responsibilities except deciding whether to eat breakfast or simply drink coffee and call it a meal. But then reality seeps in. There is no coffee. There are no mattresses. There is only the unrelenting, earthy smell of straw and the persistent ache of your back. You rise quietly, trying not to disturb Menes, who growls in his sleep like a man at war with his own dreams. Cleon mutters a few words that might be curses or possibly prayers. At this hour, the difference is academic. Theodoros is already awake, naturally. He sits cross legged by the door, methodically peeling olives with a fingernail so long it deserves its own epic poem. He looks up as you approach, gives you a solemn nod, and slides over a small clay bowl. Inside, there are 3 olives, 2 slices of what, with some optimism, could be called bread, and a slab of white cheese with the texture of wet chalk. This, you are told, is the breakfast of a true Olympian. There is no honey, no figs, not even the comfort of a second helping. You wonder, briefly, if history remembers the hunger of its heroes or only their victories. The bread is dry enough to require careful chewing, lest you chip a tooth and have to explain to an ancient dentist why you cannot compete. The olives are bitter, almost defiantly so, as if they resent their fate as breakfast rather than an offering to the gods. The cheese is cold, unaged, and suspiciously moist. It tastes of resignation. You sit outside the hut to eat because everyone else is doing so. Breakfast in Olympia is a public affair, the first act in a long drama of endurance and disappointment. Around you, other competitors crouch in circles, speaking in low tones. No one laughs. Even the most confident have the haunted look of men who have been told, repeatedly and at length, how likely they are to fail. You eat in silence, taking your time, not because you are savoring the meal, but because the longer you spend on it, the longer you can postpone the beginning of another endless day. Across the way, an old man shuffles past. He wears a robe so patched and faded that its original color has become a matter of speculation. He is carrying a jug of water, which he guards with the intensity of a dragon. He nods at you, then at your bowl, and utters a single philosophical sigh. It is the kind of sigh that communicates the entire history of civilization: disappointment, acceptance, a touch of hope, and the resignation that today, like every day, will be slightly worse than you expect. You drink the water carefully. It is slightly warm and tastes faintly of clay. You have learned that this is the normal flavor here. Water, like everything else, is not about enjoyment, but about necessity. Someone nearby sneezes violently, and the group collectively leans away, as though illness is a spirit that can be banished by the force of their collective will. Breakfast is also the time for stories, grim, cautionary tales disguised as encouragement. An elder who claims to have seen every Olympic Games since the first begins to recite a list of competitors who came, saw, and promptly lost. He recounts the tale of Nicandros of Megara, who tripped over his own tunic in the starting sprint and was remembered for nothing else. There is the story of Philon, who forgot to eat breakfast entirely and fainted during the wrestling, remembered as the faint-hearted. The moral, you are told repeatedly, is to eat your olives and keep your expectations low. As you chew on your last olive, you realize that this is as much a ritual as anything else here. You are not just feeding your body, you are preparing to become a minor note in the endless scroll of time. The others finish, stand, and stretch with the slow precision of men who know that pain is unavoidable and dignity optional. There is no applause, no trumpet, not even a polite cough to mark the end of breakfast. There is only the slow rise of the sun and the knowledge that you will spend the next hours in the company of sweat, dirt, and other people's dreams of immortality. Someone calls your name, badly mispronounced, but close enough that you know it is you. The day is beginning, and there is no escape. You leave the empty bowl on the ground, watching as a passing goat gives it a sniff of professional curiosity. For a moment, you envy the goat. No one expects it to be a hero. No one will write songs about its failures. It will eat, sleep, and, if it is lucky, avoid being sacrificed to the gods of someone else's ambition. You rise, wiping the crumbs from your hands, and prepare yourself for what comes next. The sky is still pale, the air still cool, but you know it will not last. In a few hours, the sun will be high, the games will begin, and you will step onto the field not as yourself, but as another anonymous actor in a story far older and more indifferent than you can imagine. You walk toward the training field, feeling neither strong nor heroic, but at least moderately full. That, you suspect, is the best you can hope for. After all, history may not remember what you had for breakfast, but you will, every dry, bitter bite of it. After breakfast, which sits uncomfortably in your stomach, you are herded along with the other would-be Olympians to the training field. It is not much of a field, to be honest. The earth is baked hard, with stubborn weeds growing wherever a foot has not already trampled them. There are no lines, no markers, and the only grandstand is a collection of rocks and stumps that might have been placed there by accident. You do not see the glimmer of hope in anyone's face. Everyone is already sweating, even though the sun has not yet fully risen. A trainer appears, a man whose age is impossible to guess, as his face is a map of lines and disappointments. His tunic is stained with the evidence of 100 spilled breakfasts, and his voice carries the weariness of a man who has shouted at too many stubborn boys. He waves his arm with little enthusiasm, indicating you should all line up. You obey, mostly because everyone else does. There is a kind of shared resignation in the air, as if all of you have already accepted that history will not remember your names. The first exercise is running, not the graceful, synchronized sprint you might have seen at a modern track meet. This is running in its purest, most desperate form. You are told to run around a small hill, a hill which you quickly realize is much larger than it looks from a distance. There is no track, no soft surface, just hard-packed dirt, loose stones, and the ever-present possibility of stepping on something unpleasant. You start to run, and at first, your body believes it can do this. The morning air is cool, your legs feel strong, and for a fleeting moment, you imagine that perhaps you are, after all, destined for greatness. This delusion lasts for approximately 20 steps. By the time you reach the first bend, your lungs are burning, your throat is coated in dust, and your sandals, if they can even be called that, are determined to part ways with your feet. The others are no better. Cleon, usually silent and stoic, is gasping like a dying fish. Menes curses steadily under his breath, inventing new combinations of words that probably offend at least three gods. Theodoros, who looks like he has never run in his life, lags behind, clutching his side and muttering darkly about the unfairness of nature. You pass him briefly, only to trip on a rock and nearly join the ancient Olympic tradition of falling on your face. There is no counting of laps, no whistle to tell you when to stop. Instead, the trainer throws small stones at your feet and shouts, "Again," with all the passion of a man announcing rain during a drought. Eventually, someone tries to keep count with pebbles, one for every time they pass the starting stump. This quickly devolves into confusion as the pebbles scatter and nobody can agree on who has run how many laps. In the end, everyone runs until their bodies simply refuse to continue. You collapse onto the dirt, chest heaving, sweat pouring down your face and back. Every muscle feels like it has aged a century in the past hour. You are reminded, in a very physical way, that the human body is a fragile and uncooperative machine. The bread and olives from breakfast churn in your stomach, threatening to revolt. The trainer stands over you, expressionless, and asks, "Is this the best you can do?" You know, and he knows, that it is, in fact, the absolute best you can do right now. He nods, perhaps in disappointment, perhaps in sympathy. It is difficult to tell. Next comes stretching. You watch as the men around you contort their bodies into positions that must be prescribed only by ancient torture manuals. Your own limbs resist, creaking and trembling with every attempt. You notice that some of the others have already developed a system. Stretch the leg, pretend to stretch the arm, and hope the trainer is too bored to notice. It is a reasonable strategy. The sun is climbing higher. The sweat on your skin begins to itch, mingling with dust until you are covered in a fine layer of what can only be described as future statue material. You look around and realize that this discomfort, this communal suffering, is what binds you all together. There is a peculiar comfort in it, knowing that nobody here is heroic. Not yet. Everyone is ordinary. Everyone is tired. Everyone is slightly less magnificent in person than the legends promise. Finally, the trainer calls for a break. You sit in the sparse shade of a battered olive tree, gulping warm water and listening to your heart pound in your ears. There is no talk of victory, no boasting. Everyone is too exhausted for words. Instead, you share a silence broken only by the occasional cough or the slow, deliberate cracking of someone's back. You wonder, for a brief moment, why anyone chooses to do this. Why, year after year, men gather to test themselves against the indifferent earth, the relentless sun, and each other's mediocrity. The answer, if there is one, is lost in the shuffle of dust and feet. All you know is that, for today, you have survived the first training. You are not stronger, not yet, but you are still here, and that, in this place and time, is an accomplishment. As you limp back toward the huts, every joint protesting, you realize that greatness is not a feeling. It is an ache that settles into your bones and refuses to leave. You shuffle away from the training field, trailing dust and defeat behind you. Muscles you did not know you possessed complain with each step, and your sandals, now little more than abstract concepts, clack mournfully against the hard packed ground. All around, men stagger and limp, clutching at sides, backs, and knees as if trying to hold themselves together by sheer will. The air smells of sweat, olive oil, and the fading optimism of youth. You are herded toward a shaded patch beneath a sagging olive tree where a motley assembly of men is already gathered. This, you realize, is your cohort, fellow sufferers, each here with their own story, their own city state, and their own particular brand of misplaced hope. There is little ceremony to your introductions. You collapse onto the ground, grateful for even the meager comfort of shade and company. The first to speak is Lysandros, a young man from Sparta whose reputation for harsh training is legendary. You look at him, broad shouldered, jaw set like granite, eyes narrowed with suspicion, and immediately understand why stories of Spartan discipline keep children awake at night. He greets you with a grunt and offers you a piece of dried meat so tough it might have once been used as a weapon. You chew, partly to be polite, partly to prove you are not afraid of Spartan hospitality. The meat tastes of smoke, salt, and 1,000 small resentments. Beside Lysandros sits Demetrios from Corinth, whose entire face is a map of old bruises and whose laughter sounds suspiciously like coughing. Demetrios claims, perhaps truthfully, perhaps not, to have trained with wild bulls. He shows you a scar that winds from his eyebrow to his ear, describing it as an enthusiastic misunderstanding with a cow. You nod, deciding that whatever happens, you will never let a cow anywhere near your face. Next to him is Owenos from Elis, a man of unremarkable stature but endless enthusiasm. He talks quickly, hands always moving, as if trying to shape his words into something tangible. Euenos is the type who has already memorized every name, rule, and potential loophole of the games. He quotes the judges, the priests, and even the cooks with equal authority, peppering his conversation with trivia no one asked for. Did you know, he says between breaths, that last year's champion attributed his victory to daily foot baths in cold river water? No one knows what to say to this, so the group nods in solemn, collective ignorance. Further down the line is Menace, your snoring hut mate, who, despite having the physique of a man carved from old olive wood, has the spirit of someone who would much rather be napping. He participates in every conversation by closing his eyes and offering occasional world-weary snorts. Then there is Hieron from Athens, whose hands are stained with ink and who seems entirely out of place among this assembly of battered athletes. Hieron confides in you that he is a philosopher, sent here not to win, but to observe the limits of the human condition. He records everything, scratching notes onto scraps of wax tablet, capturing not just deeds, but doubts, complaints, and Precise number of times someone uses the phrase, by the gods. When asked if he plans to compete, Heron smiles and says he is preparing for the ultimate contest, out-talking the judges. As the sun crawls higher, the talk turns from introductions to the practical business of suffering. Each man shares his method for surviving the games. Lysandros describes his regimen of early morning swims in freezing streams. Demetrios boasts of a diet that includes anything that moves slower than I do. Euenos insists on nightly prayers to whichever god seems least busy, while Hieron describes a meditation practice so complicated it seems designed solely to avoid exercise. You realize, as you listen, that all these rituals and boasts are a kind of armor. Each man builds his own mythology, not for the crowd or the record keepers, but for himself. Beneath the bravado and bluster, you recognize the same nervous energy that has kept you awake each night since arriving. You see it in the way Lysandros's hands never quite unclench, in Demetrios's laugh that edges into hysteria, in Euenos's need to recite facts as if he can talk his way out of fear, and in Hieron's endless note-taking, a desperate attempt to find meaning in discomfort. The trainers return and begin sorting the group into smaller teams for the next round of punishment. You are assigned to Lysandros's group, which seems to consist mostly of men who have made poor life choices. There is no camaraderie yet, just a kind of resigned solidarity. You catch Euenos's eye, and he gives you a look that says, "At least we will suffer together." Before you can rise, Hieron leans over and whispers, "Did you know the word agony comes from the Greek agon, meaning contest or struggle?" He smiles, as if this is somehow comforting. You consider this, briefly, as you stagger to your feet. It does not feel like trivia. It feels like prophecy. You return to the training field, flanked by your new companions in suffering. The day is just beginning, and already your body feels twice as old as when you woke. But there is comfort, strange as it is, in the knowledge that you are not alone. If you are to be forgotten by history, at least you will be forgotten in good company. You run, you stumble, you sweat. Voices rise and fall around you, some encouraging, some cursing, some simply counting down the minutes until the next meager meal. You wonder if, perhaps, this is the true heart of the games. Not glory, not victory, but the act of enduring alongside others who know exactly how little chance you have. The sun blazes overhead. Time stretches, then breaks. Somewhere, someone starts to sing, and the tune is so ancient that you are sure even the gods have forgotten its words. But it does not matter. The song, like the suffering, is shared. After the morning's mutual ordeal, your group is released for what passes as free time. This is not a blessing. In Olympia, time without tasks quickly becomes a breeding ground for speculation, anxiety, and that most ancient of Olympic traditions, gossip. You settle under a fig tree, your back aching and your legs already growing stiff as the men around you launch into their favorite pastime, dissecting the whims of the gods and the prospects of the favorites. It begins innocently enough. Someone, perhaps Uenos, remarks that the weather seems suspiciously good this year. This is the signal for the older athletes to begin their rituals of speculation. They nod gravely and agree. Yes, the sky is unusually clear. The air carries the scent of something not quite ordinary. It is the gods, they say. The gods are watching. Lysandros, who believes nothing unless it is cold, hard, and preferably from Sparta, scoffs. The gods are always watching, he mutters, except when you need them most. Nevertheless, he produces a small token from his belt, a worn disk of bronze stamped with a fading image of Apollo, and rubs it thoughtfully. You realize that even the most cynical among you carries a secret superstition tucked away like a talisman against the indifferent universe. Nearby, Demetrios announces that he has heard the high priest himself say that Zeus favors the city-state of Elise this year. This is met with immediate derision from the Athenian athletes, who point out that the high priest of Olympia is, by sheer coincidence, always from Elise. This, they explain with the confidence of men who have never met a conflict of interest they could not justify, is simply tradition. Rumors begin to swirl, gaining momentum as each man adds his own detail. Someone claims that the statue of Hera in the temple blinked during the last sacrifice, a sure sign that the women's foot race will be especially bloody this year. Another swears that the olive trees near the altar have grown exactly 7 new branches, which surely foretells victory for the 7th competitor in the discus. Hieron, always eager to contribute, points out that omens mean nothing unless interpreted by someone with absolutely no qualifications. This, he claims, is why the priests are in charge. The conversation shifts inevitably to the favorites. There are always favorites, men who arrive with reputations, entourages, and the kind of self-assurance that only comes from having been told since birth that destiny has a personal interest in their success. This year, the talk centers around Alcmaeon of Argos, a runner whose legs are said to be blessed by Hermes himself. It is rumored that he once outran a hunting dog for 3 miles, although, as Demetrios points out, no one actually saw this happen, and the dog was not available for comment. Then there is Polyxenos of Thebes, a wrestler who has never lost a match and who reportedly drinks nothing but goat's blood in the morning. His hands are so large that he can crush walnuts one-handed, a trick he demonstrates for crowds to the delight of the easily impressed. Lysandros claims to have seen him split a plank with his forehead, though Euenos counters that the plank in question was suspiciously thin. Your group exchanges these tales with a mixture of awe and skepticism. For every feat recounted, there is an opposing story of defeat. The time Alcmaeon tripped over a stray dog, the day Polyxenos was bested in an arm wrestling contest by a fisherman with enormous thumbs. The favorites, it seems, are made of equal parts glory and humiliation, and the gods themselves appear to enjoy tipping the scales from one to the other at random. Someone mentions the possibility of bribery, and the conversation grows hushed. Everyone knows that despite the solemn oaths, gifts to the judges are not uncommon. Uenos claims he once saw a competitor slip a priest a jar of honey, only for the man to suddenly discover an ancient rule disqualifying the rival. The lesson, the group agrees, is that the gods may be watching, but the judges are always closer. Superstitions flourish in this environment. You watch as athletes rub lucky stones, whisper prayers to Hera, or avoid stepping on certain cracks in the earth. One man insists on wearing the same headband every day, despite the fact that it smells like defeat. Another will only drink from a specific cup, which he claims was once used by a minor hero. Lysandros ties and unties his sandals precisely 5 times before every race, a ritual that takes longer each day but cannot, under any circumstances, be skipped. You realize, as the afternoon wears on, that much of the Olympic experience is shaped by these quiet rituals and louder rumors. There is comfort in pretending the world is predictable, that fate can be bent to your will with the right combination of prayers, bribes, and borrowed legends. You do not know if the gods are paying attention. You do not know if the favorites will live up to their hype. You only know that you are here, caught in the web of superstition and speculation, waiting for your own fate to unfold. As the sun dips lower and the evening meal approaches, your group rises, slower, stiffer, and slightly more anxious than before. You have learned nothing concrete, but you have gained the one thing every athlete truly needs: the belief, however faint, that anything is possible if you can just catch the gods on a good day. Tomorrow, perhaps, you will become the subject of someone else's rumor, or, more likely, you will simply add your own story to the long, muddled scroll of hope and disappointment that is Olympia. After another meal best described as edible rather than enjoyable, you and your fellow athletes are marched to the heart of Olympia, the stadium itself. You are not here to compete, not yet. You are here, as the trainers explain with a heaviness usually reserved for funerals, to learn about the history of the ground upon which you will shortly embarrass yourselves. The stadium is, in the most generous sense, impressive, not because it sparkles or stands tall, but because it manages to exist at all. Its track is a long, straight strip of hard packed earth, bordered on one side by a shallow, weed choked ditch, and on the other by the battered remains of what might once have been a fence. There are no seats, just grassy banks, where you are told the crowds will soon gather, bringing with them dust, noise, and an assortment of smells that will haunt you for days. You are guided by an elderly man with a beard so wild it looks like a misplaced bush. He is introduced as the stadium's official historian, a title he wears as if it were both an honor and a curse. He begins with the founding, because every Greek story begins with a founding, and you are quickly buried under an avalanche of dates, names, and details. Long before you were born, he intones, before your fathers and your fathers' fathers, this land was but a field, wild and unclaimed. It was Iphitos of Elais who, in the spirit of peace, declared the first truce and marked this sacred earth as the site of the games. You glance at the battered track, trying to imagine it as sacred. The effort nearly gives you a headache. The historian gestures at the length of the field. This, the stadion, is exactly 600 ancient feet, measured not by any common ruler, but by the foot of Hercules himself. There is a pause while you and the others look at your own feet, privately calculating whether they would be considered God sized. The answer, almost certainly, is no. He continues, recounting in loving detail the many arguments, rivalries, and full scale shouting matches that went into building the stadium. The men of Elis wanted a straight track. The men of Pisa insisted on a curve. The men of Sparta wanted something they could run across barefoot without losing toes. The compromise, as you see before you, is a perfectly straight line that somehow still manages to be uneven. There is a story, you are told, about a priest who declared the ground sufficiently level only to trip and fall during the inaugural ceremony. His humiliation, the historian notes, was later considered an omen of fairness. You learn that every stone, every clump of earth, has its legend. The starting line is a heavy marble block, pitted with years and rumors. Supposedly, it was dragged here by a team of 100 oxen or by one extremely determined athlete. The sources disagree. The finish line is less impressive, a simple scratch in the dirt, constantly redrawn by whichever judge is most bored. The historian explains the importance of the banks, which will soon be packed with spectators, not just men, but gods, if one believes the old tales. It is said, he declares with the gravity of a funeral dirge, that every god in Olympus has watched a race here, and that even the least of you may be noticed, if only for a moment. You try to imagine a god watching you trip over your own feet and decide that divine attention is perhaps overrated. Not all the stories are grand. The historian delights in recounting the year a flood turned the stadium into a mud pit, and competitors spent more time crawling than running. Or the infamous bread and olive incident, when a well meaning baker tried to hand a loaf to a passing runner, causing a pileup and 3 days of arguments about outside assistance. You are told, with no small measure of pride, that the stadium is continuously improved, by which the historian means that every year someone adds a new stone to the perimeter and declares the work finished. There are, apparently, committees devoted entirely to arguing about which shade of dirt best reflects the glory of Olympia. These committees, you suspect, are still meeting somewhere under a tree, arguing with all the energy of men who hope to avoid physical exertion. The historian's voice grows softer as he recalls darker moments. The years of war, when the games were canceled and the stadium became a field for goats. The marks of those years are still visible, he says, if you know where to look. A patch of grass that grows too thick, a scar in the earth where a javelin landed, and nobody bothered to remove it. You realize that the stadium, for all its cracks and rough edges, is a monument not to perfection, but to perseverance. Each stone is a compromise, each rut in the track a memory of failure, ambition, or just bad luck. It is a history written not by victors, but by those who bothered to show up year after year, hoping for a better result. By the time the tour is finished, the sun is high, and your mind is heavy with more facts than you will ever need. You thank the historian, who nods gravely as if he has just passed on a sacred burden. You step onto the track, feeling the uneven ground beneath your feet, and realize that you are now part of this history, another uncertain name in a story still being written. You leave the stadium with your fellow athletes, each of you quieter than before, burdened with the knowledge that history is rarely glorious, often messy, and always, somehow, just out of reach. You are told the rehearsal is only a formality, a chance to practice under real conditions. The trainers say this as if the only thing standing between you and greatness is an unfamiliar scratch in the dirt. The real conditions, it turns out, involve more than geography. They include dust in your eyes, stones in your sandals, and the insistent, unfriendly attention of everyone who wants you to fail slightly more than they do. You line up with the others, facing the length of the stadium, which, after the historian's tour, looks less like a track and more like a freshly plowed field. The starting line is a slab of marble whose only real accomplishment is being colder than the rest of the earth. You place your toes behind it and realize that all the legends and omens in the world cannot save you from what comes next. A judge steps forward, draped in a linen robe that is already streaked with sweat and authority. He holds up a hand, 4 fingers, because the thumb is busy holding a piece of bread he has no intention of sharing. He mumbles instructions. Everyone pretends to listen, but you know the words are always the same. Run fast. Do not cheat. Do not die if you can help it. Someone beside you mutters, "May Hermes be with us." It is not clear if he means the god of athletes or the god of thieves. You suspect it hardly matters. The first rehearsal is a race. One lap, one chance to embarrass yourself before the real crowds arrive. The judge lowers his arm. The sound he makes is less a shout than a sigh of resignation. You run because everyone else is running, and there is no honor in hesitation. The first steps are chaos. Men jostle for space, arms and elbows flying in a tangle of ambition and desperation. Someone trips almost immediately, setting off a chain reaction of curses and apologies. You find yourself running not in a straight line, but in a weaving path, trying to avoid the pitfalls left by last year's rainstorm and this morning's optimism. The air is thick with dust and the scent of fear. Your lungs ache, your heart pounds, and your legs, those ungrateful instruments, threaten mutiny before the halfway mark. You remember, too late, all the advice you received about pacing and posture. Instead, you focus on not falling over. Ahead, one of the favorites, Alcmaeon of Argos, if rumor is to be trusted, pulls away from the pack with the smooth confidence of someone who actually trained for this. The rest of you chase after him with varying levels of enthusiasm and skill. Menes, never known for grace, barrels forward like a man pursued by creditors, while Euenos shouts encouragement that sounds suspiciously like statistical analysis. The finish line appears, a faint line scratched in the dirt by a bored official. You summon the last of your strength and stumble across it, barely ahead of a man who, judging by his face, regrets every life choice that brought him here. You collapse to the ground, gasping sweat pooling in the hollow of your back. A judge walks past, nodding without interest, as if you are just another stone to be counted. The others finish in their own time, some triumphant, some defeated, all exhausted. There is no applause, no laurel wreaths, only the slow, steady sound of men realizing how unprepared they are for glory. Lysandros limps over, his confidence replaced by a grimace. Demetrios sits in the dirt, picking pebbles from his knees and muttering about the treachery of loose gravel. Even Alcmaeon, the golden favorite, is doubled over, catching his breath with the humility of a man who knows that being first in rehearsal guarantees nothing in the main event. You gather together, a collection of battered hopes and aching muscles, and listen as the trainers deliver their feedback. It is not encouraging. The word sluggish is used with alarming frequency. There is a lengthy debate about whether someone finished one lap or one and a half, which is settled only when a judge finds a suspiciously familiar sandal at the far end of the track. Cleon, who spent most of the race trying to tie his sandal, is awarded a special mention for creative participation. As the sun climbs higher, the rehearsal is declared a success, in the same way a shipwreck is declared a good lesson in swimming. You limp away, each step reminding you that tomorrow's real race will be even less forgiving. Someone starts a tally of bruises and blisters, with the unofficial winner being the man whose foot now resembles a badly baked loaf of bread. The rest of the day is spent in silence and self reflection. Some men return to the shade, muttering prayers or cursing their fate. Others nurse wounds, both physical and otherwise. You sit, staring at the distant line of the stadium, and wonder if perhaps greatness is simply the refusal to give up when giving up would be the reasonable thing to do. Evening comes, and the rehearsal is already being recast as legend. Tales are told of heroic falls, miraculous recoveries, and one unnamed athlete who ran the wrong way for an entire lap. You laugh with the others, not because it is funny, but because laughter is all that stands between you and despair. As night falls, you lie in your straw bed, every muscle a testament to effort and error. You think of the real race to come, the crowd that will soon fill the banks, and the possibility that, just once, you might cross the finish line with dignity. Until then, you remind yourself, run while you still can. Tomorrow, the real test begins. There are many ways to pass a restless night in Olympia. Listening to the snores and mutters of your companions, counting the blisters on your feet, or, if you are truly desperate, pondering the Olympic rules. The rules you discover are a subject of endless fascination, confusion, and quiet rebellion among the athletes. They are recited, repeated, and revised so many times that you suspect even the gods have lost track. Your morning begins with a mandatory assembly beneath a drooping olive tree. A judge, balding, bespectacled, and already irritated by the crowd, stands atop a cracked stone and produces a scroll so long it unrolls across the ground and tangles with a passing goat. He clears his throat, squints at the sunlight, and launches into the recitation. You are not to bribe the judges, he begins. This is greeted with a ripple of laughter. No one is naive enough to believe it, least of all the judges, who keep their hands open and their eyes averted whenever anyone approaches with a particularly large jar of oil. You are not to cheat. This, too, is a matter of interpretation. The line between creative advantage and unacceptable behavior shifts according to the city state of the competitor and the mood of the official. The rules, you notice, are delivered with all the solemnity of sacred law and all the flexibility of wet clay. There is a rule about not attacking another competitor with a weapon, followed by a footnote specifying which items count as weapons. Sand, for instance, is apparently a gray area, useful for blinding your opponent, but only if done with subtlety. There are rules about the acceptable length of a runner's hair, the width of a wrestler's belt, and the number of goats that can be brought into the stadium. None unless for sacrifice, and even then, only on even numbered days. You learn that athletes must compete naked, a fact recited with such pride you would think it was a mark of civilization. The rule is justified with elaborate stories of ancient heroes, modesty, and the search for perfect form. In reality, you suspect it is simply a convenient way for the judges to ensure no one is hiding weapons, scripts, or good luck charms. Still, you stand with the others, exposed to the world and the elements, wondering if glory is worth the risk of sunburn in unusual places. There is an entire section of rules dedicated to birth and lineage. Only freeborn Greek men of legitimate parentage may compete. This leads to a lively debate among the athletes, some of whom claim descent from gods, others from local celebrities, and one from a particularly famous goat. The judges make a show of checking each competitor's credentials, which consist mostly of confident declarations and the occasional forged family tree. Next, you are instructed on the correct procedure for swearing the sacred Olympic oath. You must declare before the gods and witnesses that you will abide by the rules, compete with honor, and not disgrace your city state. The oath is administered with such ceremony that you almost believe it means something, right up until you notice Lysandros crossing his fingers behind his back. Special rules apply to certain events. In wrestling, biting is forbidden, but pinching is encouraged in moderation. In pancration, the only rule is not to gouge out your opponent's eyes, though, as Demetrios points out, losing one eye is considered an acceptable sacrifice if victory is in reach. The race judges squabble for 20 minutes over whether a fall counts as a step, and the matter is resolved only when a philosopher in the audience suggests that all movement is an illusion. There are even rules for spectators, though no one expects them to be followed. No women are permitted to attend, except for the priestess of Demeter, who is allowed because tradition requires at least one person in the audience to be sober. Merchants are forbidden from hawking their wares during the events, but somehow olives and cheap wine appear at every corner. As the list of rules drags on, you notice the competitors growing restless. Hieron scratches new grievances into his wax tablet. Menes tries to nap without being noticed. Uenos attempts to calculate the odds of disqualification in every event, based on the previous year's scandals. Eventually, the judge's voice trails off, and he dismisses the assembly with a wave that suggests even he no longer believes in the power of the rules. The athletes disperse, muttering and laughing, each of them already plotting ways to circumvent the regulations, or, failing that, to plead ignorance. You leave the meeting with the sinking realization that the games are less a contest of strength and skill and more a labyrinth of bureaucracy and arbitrary enforcement. Victory, it seems, belongs not to the swift or the strong, but to the cunning, the lucky, and those with the good sense to avoid the attention of the judges. As you walk back toward your hut, you overhear a group debating whether oiled skin constitutes an unfair advantage or simply good hygiene. Someone bets a loaf of bread that at least 3 rules will be broken before midday. You do not take the bet. You have seen the judges' faces and you know they are already planning new rules for next year, rules to address this year's creative interpretations. In Olympia, you conclude the only true law is survival, and, if possible, to make it through the games with your dignity and at least most of your teeth intact. The morning of the ceremonial opening arrives with a dull, gray sky that promises nothing and delivers less. There is a chill in the air, not the invigorating kind that stirs warriors to action, but the creeping cold that seeps into your bones and makes every joint ache. The trainers insist that this is an omen, though what it signifies, no one can agree. Some whisper that the gods are displeased, others, more pragmatic, complain that the weather is simply another excuse for disaster. Breakfast is a muted affair, the olives even more bitter than usual, the bread dry and crumbly as ancient papyrus. Theodoros, who never wastes words, looks at his bowl with such profound disappointment that you feel a kinship with him for the first time. Around you, the atmosphere is thick with nerves. Men joke in low voices, their laughter forced and sharp at the edges. Lysandros sharpens a stick for no reason other than to keep his hands occupied. Hiram mutters a speech under his breath, revising it after every sentence. Demetrios paces back and forth like a caged animal, occasionally pausing to glare at the sky. You are led, with the others, toward the edge of the stadium. There, the preparations for the opening ceremony are already underway. The judges bustle about in their finest tunics, which are still slightly stained from last night's meal. Priests and priestesses, draped in robes that have not seen a good washing in living memory, rehearse their prayers and hymns. The high priest of Zeus, distinguished only by a hat the size of a small goat, supervises the arrangement of sacrificial offerings. An unfortunate piglet, a mound of barley, and what looks suspiciously like last week's leftover cheese. The athletes are assembled in 2 uneven lines. You stand shoulder to shoulder with men who all wear the same expression, a mix of dread, boredom, and a desperate wish for invisibility. The opening is not meant for you. It is for the gods and the crowds, for history and ceremony. Your role is to remain upright and, if possible, not to faint from nerves or hunger. The instructions are simple. Stand still, look solemn, and march in slow, dignified steps when your name is called. The judges repeat this several times, each time finding new ways to complicate the process. You practice your march, a process that quickly devolves into chaos as men trip over their own feet or walk in the wrong direction. After the third failed rehearsal, the trainers abandon hope and announce that good enough will suffice for this year. You are then anointed with olive oil, cold, sticky, and possessing a smell that will haunt your nostrils for days. This is, supposedly, a sign of honor and purification. In practice, it makes you and everyone else look like a collection of badly sculpted statues left out in the rain. Lysandros jokes that the oil will make you harder to catch if you try to run away. No one laughs, but everyone smiles. The crowd begins to gather on the banks: citizens, travelers, merchants, and children. Their expectations are low, but their voices are loud. The anticipation in the air is thick enough to trip over. Spectators jostle for a better view, arguing over who has the right to sit on which patch of grass. You see a woman smuggle a bundle of grapes beneath her cloak, a bold act of rebellion against the food vendors who have already tripled their prices for the occasion. As the sun struggles to break through the clouds, the high priest signals the start of the procession. A flute squeaks out a nervous melody, barely audible above the murmur of the crowd. The athletes begin their slow march, and you find yourself walking in time with men whose only real ambition is not to collapse. Each step is a triumph of will over discomfort. You approach the altar of Zeus, the heart of the ceremony. The high priest recites a prayer in ancient, formal Greek, his words drifting upward and outward, as if hoping the gods will be too distracted to notice the errors. Offerings are made, grain is scattered, wine is poured. The unfortunate piglet meets its fate with a resigned squeal. The smell of burning fat mingles with incense, creating a haze that is part sacred, part choking. Then comes the oath. Each athlete steps forward in turn, placing a hand on the remains of a boar and swearing to compete honorably. You speak the words with as much conviction as you can muster, knowing that the real test will not be your honesty, but your ability to remember the rules long enough to avoid disqualification. There is a pause while the judges consult among themselves, debating the finer points of the ceremony. One insists the procession was too fast. Another claims the incense was insufficiently smoky. The debate is resolved by a shrug and the distribution of small tokens, wreaths, badges, and, for reasons unknown, a single slightly moldy apple. At last, the ceremony is declared complete. The crowd cheers, though the sound is as much relief as celebration. The athletes are released from their formation, free to return to their huts, their routines, and their anxiety. You trudge away, exhausted by the effort of appearing dignified, and collapse onto your straw mat, feeling the oil seep into your skin. You stare at the ceiling and wonder if the gods were watching. More likely, they were distracted by the bickering of priests and the promise of better entertainment elsewhere. Still, you have survived the opening, and for now, that is enough. Tomorrow, the real trials begin. Tonight, you allow yourself the small victory of having endured ceremony without disaster. In Olympia, you are learning even surviving boredom is a kind of achievement. The first day dawns with a kind of heavy, grudging light. The air is already thick and unmoving, pressing down on the village, the stadium, and especially on your nerves. Sleep had been a theory rather than a practice, interrupted by the anxious shuffling of feet, the soft moans of men rehearsing their failures, and the distant bleating of goats, creatures for whom the games are little more than an excuse for additional noise. You gather with the others at the edge of the stadium, a mass of nervous energy clad in nothing but oil and bravado. Some competitors pace, others squat in silence, but all eyes flicker to the crowd gathering on the banks. The citizens of Olympia arrive in droves, shouting, waving, wagering on whose cousin will fall first. The judges parade past, draped in linen and self importance, their faces set in that universal expression reserved for men who think rules matter more than outcomes. Today's event is the stadium race, a single, straight sprint from one end of the field to the other, a race that will determine who, for a few shining minutes, gets to be remembered and who will be forgotten before the dust settles. You are assigned to the first heat. The realization that there is nowhere left to hide settles into your bones. The official steps forward, staff in hand, and calls the runners to the starting line. There is a brief argument about whose heel is over the marble block. This is resolved in true Olympic fashion, with loud denials, creative reinterpretations of the rules, and finally, a judge shrugging and waving everyone forward. You stand, tense, toes digging into the dirt, heart thudding a mournful rhythm. There is no gun, only a hoarse cry from the judge. You burst forward, immediately colliding with two other men who had the same idea about the fastest line. For a few desperate steps, it is all elbows, knees, and curses. The dust rises around you, turning every breath into a gamble. The stadium, you realize, is both shorter and longer than you ever imagined. Short enough to demand your maximum effort from the first instant, long enough to ensure your muscles fail you just before the finish. You focus on movement, legs pumping, arms flailing, lungs screaming for air. Somewhere to your left, Lysandros pulls ahead, his face twisted in equal parts pain and pride. To your right, Demetrios stumbles, but somehow keeps his feet, a study in the mechanics of barely controlled disaster. You have no sense of speed, only the mounting certainty that you are both too slow and too exhausted to matter. Spectators shout encouragement, but their words blur into noise. Someone is already celebrating victory before the race is even halfway done, an act of optimism that will cost them dearly in the final meters. You pass the halfway mark and feel your body entering that strange space where all choices seem equally regrettable. Speed up and risk collapse, slow down and risk humiliation. The finish line, a crude scratch in the dust, appears with brutal suddenness. You lunge forward, every muscle straining, and cross it in a tangle of limbs with three other runners. You collapse to your knees, gulping air and dust in equal measure, your vision flickering between triumph and blackout. Judges converge, arguing over the order of finishers. There is much pointing, hand waving, and at one point, an impromptu debate about whether someone's foot or hand counts as crossing the line. Eventually, the official verdict is announced. Lysandros is declared the winner of your heat. You are assigned a place somewhere in the murky middle, neither glorious nor shamed, which you suspect is the fate of most men in history. The process regards for each heat, the same chaos, the same wild sprints, the same cries of dismay and exultation. Some runners fall before they even reach halfway, sprawling into the dust and rolling to their feet in a performance worthy of comedy. Others, favored by gods or by training, streak ahead, their names already whispered as potential champions. When all heats are finished, the winners are summoned for the final. They stand, chests heaving, legs shaking, eyes wild. The crowd leans forward, eager for something, anything, to break the monotony of anticipation. The final race is announced, and the stadium hushes. In that moment, you feel a strange camaraderie with everyone present, runners, judges, even spectators. All of you are waiting for something miraculous, or at least memorable. The final sprint is over in a blur, a tangle of bodies, a storm of dust, a cry of triumph as the favorite surges ahead by a margin so slim that it must be measured in heartbeats. The crowd erupts. For a few seconds, the winner stands alone, arms raised, the living proof that at least one man has outrun regret. The rest of you, those who finished, those who fell, those who barely mattered, return to the edge of the stadium, nursing your wounds, bruised but alive. As the dust settles, you sit in the shade, letting your pulse return to something like normal. The first day of the games is over. The world has not changed. The gods, if they watched, have not spoken. But you have run your race, felt history slip beneath your feet, and, for a fleeting moment, belonged to the story of Olympia. You realize, as the sun begins to set, that glory is rare, defeat is common, and the only certainty is the soreness in your legs. Tomorrow promises more pain, more dust, and perhaps another small chance to be remembered, even if only by yourself. The stadium race behind you, you are granted that rarest and most ambiguous of Olympic rewards, a break. Not a triumphal celebration, but a slow dispersal of bodies in various stages of exhaustion, humiliation, or quiet pride. The sun sits high, the air is heavy, and your own legs throb with that dull ache which promises to deepen with every passing hour. You find your way to the scattered shade under a gnarled olive tree, where the ground is only marginally softer and the grass only slightly greener. Other athletes drift toward the spot, drawn by the gravity of shared pain and the slim hope of respite. Some lie flat on their backs, gazing upward at a sky untroubled by their struggles. Others gingerly inspect scrapes, blisters, or, in one unfortunate case, a toe that will never be quite straight again. Food is distributed: bread, a few more olives, a wedge of cheese. You chew with the slow deliberation of a man who knows that every swallow brings you closer to another round of exertion. No one talks of glory. Instead, the conversations, perhaps softened by fatigue and necessity, turn philosophical. Huron is, naturally, the first to seize the moment. He sits cross legged, wax tablet balanced on one knee, stylus poised for whatever profound thought might stagger into the clearing. It is a curious thing, he begins, that we pursue excellence in suffering. What is the virtue in running until collapse, or wrestling until breathless? He glances around, daring anyone to challenge him. Most ignore the invitation, focused on their cheese. Euenos, still reciting facts even through a mouthful of bread, responds with numbers. Did you know, he says, that the average athlete here consumes 2 times the normal ration of food and loses like 3 times that in sweat? He seems content with this as an explanation for human striving. Huron rolls his eyes so theatrically it is a small performance in itself. Lysandros, never one for theory, scoffs. We do it because there is nothing else to do. In Sparta, a man who does not compete is a man without purpose. Here, at least, we pretend it means something. Demetrios, poking at a particularly nasty bruise, grins. I do it because sometimes, if you're lucky, someone remembers your name, or at least buys you a drink in your own city. He pauses. But mostly, I do it because my mother told everyone I was destined for greatness, and it is easier to run than to disappoint her. Theodorus, who has spoken only rarely, adds, and if you lose, what then? He gestures with his olive pit. All these stories, all this effort, what is left when you go home with nothing but bruises? A silence falls, deep and slightly uncomfortable. It is the kind of silence that only forms when the truth is too simple and too heavy. You realize as you stare at your hands, dusty, scraped, imperfect, that there may be no answer. The games are not a story of guaranteed victory or even noble defeat. They are a story of survival, of endurance, of finding meaning in the act itself. Philosophers, of course, cannot leave a silence alone for long. Heron leans in, lowering his voice as if preparing for a revelation. There are those, he says, who believe the soul is tested in hardship, that the struggle is the point, not the reward at the end, but the wrestling with yourself along the way. He pauses, giving the words a moment to settle. Perhaps the true competition is not against each other, but against the limits of what we think we can endure. You consider this, chewing your bread and weighing its merit. You remember the faces of the fallen runners, the gasps of those who collapse short of the finish, the way the crowd only remembers the victor's name. You wonder if Huron is right, if the pain is not just a consequence, but the actual prize. If, as some seem to believe, suffering itself is a form of wisdom, then you are all well on your way to becoming sages. Menes, who rarely speaks, finally mutters, wisdom tastes a lot like old cheese. A wave of laughter rolls through the group, chasing away the last of the tension. The bread, the olives, the cheese, all are consumed, not because they are delicious, but because they are here and you are hungry. As the sun passes its zenith, the trainers return to round up the athletes for the next round of contests. You stand slowly, joints protesting, back aching, but with the sense that something has shifted, not in the world, but in you. You are, for the briefest moment, part of a brotherhood, not of champions, but of men who have looked the absurdity of the games in the face and decided to keep going anyway. You brush the crumbs from your tunic, share a nod with the others, and prepare yourself for whatever new ordeal awaits. The break is over, the philosophy forgotten, or perhaps quietly carried with you, tucked somewhere between your bruises and your fading hope of glory. You leave the shade of the olive tree with the sense that, in a world ruled by the whims of gods and the accidents of fate, finding a reason to keep running may be the closest thing to victory you will ever know. The olive tree's shadow and the luxury of philosophical despair vanish as you and the others are herded back to the stadium for wrestling. There is no time to nurse aches or debate meaning, only time to strip down, rub on more olive oil, and face your opponents with a confidence that, by now, is entirely performative. The ground is less a field and more a patchwork of dust, old footprints, and the scattered hopes of last year's losers. The rules of wrestling are repeated for what must be the thousandth time. No biting, no eye gouging, pinching only if you can get away with it, and always bow to the judges before and after. The judges, perched in their makeshift box, look about as alert as a trio of ancient turtles, but you know better than to test their attention. You are paired, predictably, with Manus, your hutmate, your rival in snores, now your opponent in humiliation. Minas is built like a weathered statue, his arms thick and his patience thin. You greet each other with a nod, no words needed. You are both resigned to the outcome, whatever it is. The signal is given, no trumpet, just a grunt from a judge, and you circle each other warily, feet sliding in the dust. The first grapple is awkward, a tangle of arms and uncertain intentions. Menes lunges and you dodge, barely, stumbling over a hidden rock. He seizes your arm and tries to throw you, but your body, stubborn and slippery with oil, refuses to cooperate. Around you, other pairs are locked in their own battles. Grunts, gasps, and the occasional shriek rise above the crowd. Dust swirls, sweat stings your eyes, and somewhere, someone is already bleeding from the nose. Wrestling, you realize, is less about skill and more about survival, a contest of endurance and discomfort, where victory is often decided by who gives up first. Min's gets you in a hold that is equal parts embrace and attempted murder. You twist, your foot slipping, and the two of you tumble to the ground in a heap. The world narrows to elbows and knees, pain and pressure. You manage, through luck or instinct, to free yourself and reverse the hold. Now it is men's gasping, his face red, teeth clenched in silent agony. The match drags on, the judges too slow or too indifferent to end it quickly. Time loses all meaning. Eventually, Menace shifts his weight, trying for a final desperate move, but his grip falters. You seize your chance, pinning his shoulders to the ground just long enough for the nearest judge to notice and grunt approval. The match is over. You lie there, both of you breathing like wounded oxen, sweat mixing with the dirt on your skin. Menes offers a hand, and you accept it, pulling yourself up with a sense of grim camaraderie. There is no shame in losing, not today. The real humiliation is reserved for those who try to leave the field before the judges have had their fill of spectacle. As you limp to the edge of the arena, you notice that blood has begun to soak through a gash on your arm, a souvenir from Minas' fingernails, or perhaps the rocky earth. Around you, others sport black eyes, swollen lips, and a variety of injuries that will become their stories for years to come. A healer, if one can call a woman with vinegar, old cloth, and no patience a healer, daubs your wound with a solution that burns worse than the original cut. You wince, but she ignores you, already moving on to the next victim. The crowd, never satisfied, calls for more. The next round begins. The next pair of competitors shuffle forward, and the cycle of pain repeats. Lysandros makes quick work of his opponent, throwing him with a force that seems personal. Demetrios, ever theatrical, feigns defeat, only to reverse the hold at the last second, earning a rare burst of applause. It is not long before someone is truly hurt. A dislocated shoulder, a broken nose, a howl that echoes off the stadium walls. The judges confer, shrug, and gesture for the next match to proceed. You realize, not for the first time, that the games are less a test of excellence and more a demonstration of the human capacity to endure. By the time the last match finishes, the sun is low and the shadows long. The victors are announced, not with trumpets, but with a lazy wave from the judge and the promise of an extra loaf of bread at dinner. The losers nurse their wounds and their pride, already plotting how they will explain the day's results to those back home. You stagger away from the arena, every joint aching, every breath a reminder that glory comes at a cost. Bloodied but unbowed, you rejoin your fellow athletes at the evening meal, where bread and tales of close calls are passed around with equal enthusiasm. Even Heron, normally above such things, sports a bruise on his chin and a new respect for the laws of gravity. As darkness falls and the fires are lit, you find a measure of satisfaction in having survived. Victory, you think, is overrated. Survival is its own reward. You fall asleep with the taste of blood and dust in your mouth and the certainty that tomorrow will demand even more. The morning after wrestling is not kind. You wake to the slow, spreading ache of bruises, to the stale tang of dried sweat and blood, and to the distant but unmistakable sound of a judge clearing his throat. There is no time for self-pity. Today, you are summoned early for what the trainers call a lesson in justice. You suspect this means listening to judges remind you who truly controls your fate. The judges are everywhere, each more severe than the last. They walk among the athletes, their robes freshly dusted, their faces locked in that expressionless mask that only men entrusted with power can master. In the center of the field, a table has been set up, and on it lie the tools of their trade, a handful of olive wreaths, a tally of names, a ledger heavy with complaints, and, unmistakably, a small pile of offerings. Jars of oil, cakes of honey, the occasional trinket wrapped in cloth. The first order of the day is the hearing of disputes. These are as inevitable as the sunrise. Lysandros stands accused of excessive enthusiasm in yesterday's wrestling, which everyone understands means he nearly broke his opponent's arm. He protests, of course, but the judge silences him with a glance, takes a measured sip from a gifted amphora of wine, and declares the matter settled in the spirit of athletic brotherhood. Demetrios, meanwhile, is accused of having stepped over the line in the sprint, a charge he meets with elaborate indignation and a subtle transfer of a honeycomb to the nearest official. After a brief, whispered consultation and a suspicious amount of winking, he is found not guilty due to lack of evidence and the generosity of spirit displayed by all parties. No one is surprised. Bribery is an open secret. Euenos, who has made a study of such things, claims that the art of gift giving is older than the games themselves. The gods may not be bribed, he says, but their priests certainly can. You watch as competitors offer the judges small tokens, not always with subtlety. A loaf of fresh bread changes hands with a deliberate nod. An athlete from Thebes presents a ring, ostentatiously, for services rendered. The judges accept these gifts with the air of men accustomed to such ceremonies, never asking, never refusing, always receiving. There is, of course, a public face to this justice. Every so often, the judges make a show of punishing someone who goes too far. This year, it is a runner from Argos, caught with an obvious counterfeit token. The punishment is as public as it is theatrical. The man is fined, paraded before the spectators, and forced to recite an apology he clearly does not mean. The crowd laughs, the judges nod, and the games continue. But the true justice of Olympia is not about rules, it is about appearances. You learn quickly that the best athletes are those who know when to protest, when to grovel, and when to keep their heads down. Menes, whose stubborn honesty is legendary, receives only scowls and an extra lap around the stadium for his troubles. Hieron, ever the philosopher, tries to argue a fine point of law and is rewarded with a lecture on humility that lasts longer than most races. You come to understand that the games are a theater and the judges are both actors and audience. They play at fairness, but fairness is only another game. Victory can be bought, lost, or borrowed, but never truly won without a nod from those in charge. The rules are flexible, the judgments personal, and justice, such as it is, comes down to the whims of men whose loyalty is to tradition, spectacle, and the quiet clinking of bribes in the night. The athletes adjust accordingly. You see it in the subtle glances, the quiet exchanges, the way bread and oil travel from hand to hand with a kind of ceremonial inevitability. You see it in the way favorites emerge, not just from speed or strength, but from connections, timing, and the ability to flatter at the right moment. As the sun climbs, the business of judgment winds down. The judges retire to their tent, their ledgers slightly heavier, their faces unreadable. You and the others drift back to your routines, each of you carrying the uneasy knowledge that the line between victory and defeat is written not in the dust of the track, but in the margins of the judge's records. That evening, as you break bread with your companions, the stories flow more freely. Some laugh at the spectacle, others grumble, but all accept the truth. Justice, here, is just another contest. In Olympia, as in life, the winners are not always the fastest or the strongest, but often those with the fullest hands and the shortest memories. You drift to sleep that night with the faintest taste of honey on your tongue and the sharp, unshakable certainty that the next day's contests will depend as much on chance and favor as on effort. In the end, history will remember only the victors, not how they won, nor at what price. Evening arrives with a chill, and the dust of the day settles over Olympia like a faded shroud. The contests are done, the officials have retreated to their tents, and the crowds have drifted away, some to feasts, others to forget. For those who did not win, the night brings a different kind of gathering, a quiet congress of the disappointed. You find yourself among them, drawn by equal parts curiosity and the need to belong somewhere, even if it is only among the losers. A small fire burns near the edge of the athletes' camp. Its glow is muted, casting more shadow than light, and those who sit around it keep their voices low. These are men who entered the games with hope and now sit with new aches, old regrets, and stories no one will ever sing. The champions feast elsewhere, toasted by the city's notables and immortalized in fresh verse. Here, the only applause is the gentle crackle of burning olive wood. The talk is not of victory, but of how it slipped away. Someone recounts, with rueful humor, how he lost his footing in the pancration and found himself locked in a headlock by a man twice his size. Another admits he froze at the starting line, his body refusing every command his mind screamed. They laugh softly at the absurdity of failure. You hear the relief in their laughter. There is freedom, it seems, in having nothing left to lose. An older athlete, whose hands are knotted with years of futile training, tells the story of his first games. He describes how he arrived believing himself destined for glory, only to discover the difference between hometown pride and the cruel arithmetic of competition. The only thing harder than losing, he says, is pretending you do not care. Ghosts of old contests drift through the conversation. Men recall legendary defeats. The runner who led for 99 paces before tripping over a stray sandal, the wrestler who forgot the rules and disqualified himself with a misplaced punch, the jumper who landed so awkwardly that the judges debated whether he had invented a new event. The names of the vanquished outnumber the victors, and their tales are retold as caution, comfort, and sometimes a warning. One man, a lean figure from distant Thrace, tells of a friend who competed years ago. He was faster than anyone I had ever seen. They said he was chosen by Hermes himself. On the day of his race, he woke up with a fever, He ran anyway and finished last. No one remembers his name now, but I do. Around the fire, heads nod in silent agreement. You sense a shared understanding that memory is a fragile thing, easily swept aside by the triumphs of others. A younger boy, bruised and still trembling from the day's defeat, asks if any of it is worth the pain. The older men are slow to answer. Finally, Huron, who has quietly joined the circle, speaks. History is written by those who win, but it is carried by those who lose. Most of us will be forgotten, but we are the ones who keep the games alive by coming back, by telling our stories, by teaching others not to make our mistakes. As the night deepens, the stories shift from failure to what comes after. Men describe the long walks home, the awkward explanations to family, the decision to try again or to leave glory to younger, hungrier souls. Some swear this was their last contest. Others, already mending, speak of next year. In defeat, you realize there is a kind of community, the knowledge that you are not alone, that your pain and disappointment are both unique and universal. Above, the stars glimmer cold and distant, indifferent to the fates of men. Around the fire, the losers share bread, wine, and silence. No one talks of gods or fate anymore. The only prayers are for rest, for healing, and perhaps for the courage to show their faces at home. When the fire burns low, you rise and return to your straw mat, body heavy, but spirit strangely lighter. You understand now that history is a patchwork of failures, and the ghosts of glory linger not just in statues and poems, but in the quiet resilience of those who endure and return, year after year, hoping for something more. You sleep that night in the company of the defeated, surrounded by their stories. Half memory, half warning, you dream, not of victory, but of another chance, another race, another day, beneath the indifferent gaze of the gods. Dawn comes sluggishly, the sky a smudge of gray. You wake with every muscle throbbing, and it takes longer than usual to remember your own name. This morning, your greatest wish is for a new body, or at least new knees, but what you get instead is the promise of pancration, a contest that combines wrestling and boxing and removes the mercy from both. Pancration is for the brave, the foolhardy, and those who have run out of reasons to be cautious. The rules are few and simple: no biting, no gouging of the eyes, and everything else is permitted. You listen to the instructions and realize that the only real rule is survival. The crowd loves pancration for the same reason bakers love stale bread. It is messy, unpredictable, and someone is always left with bruises that last a lifetime. You line up with the other competitors. Some are hulking, scarred veterans with ears that resemble figs left too long in the sun. Others, like you, are men who wonder, as they stretch and crack their knuckles, whether they have made a catastrophic error in judgment. Menace grins at you with a mouth already missing 2 teeth. This, he says, is where we prove the philosophers wrong. The first match begins with a roar from the crowd. The contestants circle, then charge, colliding in a flurry of limbs. There is little grace to pancration only intent and pain. A man from Corinth wins his bout by trapping his opponent in a hold that looks more like an accident than a technique. The judges watch with the bored attention of men who have seen too many versions of the same struggle. Your turn comes with an emptiness in your stomach that no olive or bread could ever fill. You step onto the rough earth, square your shoulders, and face your opponent, a man from Elise, with fists like hammers and a jaw that seems to have evolved for the sole purpose of withstanding punishment. The crowd hushes. Someone mutters a prayer to Heracles, though whether it is for your benefit or your opponent's, you cannot tell. The bout begins. At first, you manage to dodge, to keep your distance, but the circle shrinks, the blows come faster, and your plans dissolve under the pressure of pure instinct. A fist catches you in the ribs, another grazes your temple. You grapple, your arms locking around your opponent's waist, and the two of you crash to the ground. The world becomes elbows, knees, dirt in your mouth, and the sickening clarity of pain. You lose track of time. The match is a blur, half agony, half strategy. You remember trying to twist free, to drive your knee into your opponent's side, to breathe even as the air is forced from your lungs. The crowd's cheers and jeers blend into a single, relentless noise. At some point, your opponent nearly wrenches your shoulder out of its socket, but you twist, bite your lip, and refuse to yield. You do not win, not in the official sense. After what seems like an eternity, your opponent pins you, your face pressed into the dust. The judge thumps the ground, a signal more for the crowd than for the contestants. You roll away, gasping, your mouth filled with the taste of blood and earth. The healer, whose bedside manner has not improved, dabs at your swollen lip and shrugs. Could be worse, she says, as if that is comfort. Menace is next, and his match lasts even less time. He emerges from the melee with a black eye and a smile, declaring, "Now we are truly Olympic men." The joke is as battered as your body, but everyone laughs. Others fare worse. One man limps away on a makeshift crutch. Another is led out by two friends, unable to open his eyes. The victors do not look much better than the vanquished. In pancration, victory is often measured in how much you can still move afterward. That evening, the athletes gather to compare bruises, swap horror stories, and speculate about which bones might never heal. Someone produces a wineskin, and even the losers get a taste. Euenos lists famous pancratiasts of the past, men whose careers ended in permanent limps and whose fame was measured in scars. Hieron, ever philosophical, observes that pain is the great equalizer. In the end, we all meet it on the same ground. The talk grows quieter as the night deepens. The bravest men are not those who win, you decide, but those who return to fight again, despite knowing exactly what awaits them. There is a peculiar dignity in simply enduring, one that does not appear in statues or songs, but lingers in every stiff step and quiet sigh. You sleep that night grateful, if only for the fact that tomorrow, for a few hours at least, you will not have to fight. The morning after pancration is one of slow movements and quiet reflection. Bruised, battered, and heavier with new aches, you discover that today's greatest challenge is simply rising from your straw mat. The hut is silent except for the groans of men pretending they are still asleep, as if the day might forget to begin if nobody acknowledges it. But the games wait for no man, not even the wounded. Outside, Olympia stirs. The air is laced with the scent of last night's fires, trampled grass, and sweat, the unchanging perfume of athletic ambition. This morning, before the competitions resume, attention shifts from the field to the world of the invisible, to rituals, omens, and all the little bargains men try to strike with the gods, fate, and their own doubts. Superstition is the silent guest at every Olympic breakfast. It lurks in the way men touch the ground before rising, in the careful placement of sandals, in the ritual washing of hands with water fetched only from a certain well. You notice that Theodoros, who has otherwise shown little interest in ceremony, spends a long time rubbing his palms with olive oil and murmuring a prayer too quiet for you to hear. Lysandros, proud Spartan, spits 3 times over his shoulder before eating, then ties and unties his belt until he seems satisfied with some hidden pattern. There are rituals for every occasion, and no two men agree on which are most effective. Some athletes sleep with a pebble under their tongue the night before an event, hoping to sweeten their words when the judges call their name. Others braid a single hair from their mother into their headband, a private charm against injury. Euenos, who prides himself on his rational mind, nevertheless refuses to look a crow in the eye before a race, citing a story about a runner who did so and tore his calf muscle 3 steps in. The camps are full of whispered advice. Eat only the left half of your bread on contest days. Wear a red thread around your ankle to keep away jealous spirits. Touch the altar of Zeus with your right hand, but never your left. Never let anyone sweep the floor behind you as you leave your hut, lest they sweep away your luck as well. Even the most skeptical follow these rituals, if only out of fear of being the one man the gods choose to punish for arrogance. At the edges of the field, you witness more elaborate rites. A group from Elise stands in a circle, chanting and pouring out a libation of watered wine to the earth. One man wraps his wrists in garlic skins to ward off weakness. Another kneels, pressing his forehead to the ground and promising the gods a share of his winnings, if, by some miracle, he has any winnings at all. Superstition extends to the equipment. Men obsessively check the smoothness of their throwing stones, polish their discus with ash and spit, test their javelins for straightness by sighting them against the rising sun. Even the oil used for anointing is a matter of debate. Some say oil pressed on the second day of the month brings victory. Others swear by the darkest, bitterest batch, the one that leaves a sheen and a stench on your skin long after the contest is done. Not all rituals are benign. In hushed tones, men warn of curses cast by rivals, of athletes who suffered mysterious fevers after mocking the gods, of sudden accidents blamed on neglected offerings. Hieron, half mocking, tells of a famous wrestler who insulted Hera and woke the next morning to find both his arms numb. The crowd laughs, but nobody volunteers to test the story. You find yourself, almost unconsciously, picking up a few habits. You avoid stepping on cracks in the worn earth, whisper a quick thanks to any passing shrine, and rub your lucky pebble, found the first morning, oddly shaped like a tiny foot, before each event. It is a comfort, or at least a distraction, in a world where logic offers little solace and justice is as slippery as the oiled ground. That evening, after a day of cautious effort and many small failures, the athletes gather to compare notes on fortune. They recount the rituals of former champions, bizarre, intricate, or simply absurd. Someone claims a victor once ate nothing but figs and onions for 3 days. Another swears by a diet of raw eggs and recited verses. No one agrees on the details, but everyone agrees that it worked because the man won. The night air is heavy with secrets and the low hum of superstition. As you lay down to rest, you realize that these rituals, whatever their source, bind you and the others in a shared uncertainty, a desperate hope that somewhere, somehow, the balance can be tipped in your favor by the smallest of gestures. In Olympia, you understand, no one truly believes in luck until the moment they have nothing left but luck to believe in. If the first day of the games is about speed, the second is about weight and distance. You wake to the steady drone of complaints, knees swollen, shoulders stiff, dreams interrupted by nightmares of flying objects. The bread is staler than usual, the olives taste faintly of defeat, and the only thing that keeps you moving is the knowledge that the games will not end simply because your body wants them to. Today's contests are for those with broad backs, quick reflexes, and a willingness to trust physics more than fate. The discus and the javelin. The field is marked with a line scratched by a stick and the memory of last year's champions. The judges, squinting in the morning light, seem even more arbitrary than usual. One adjusts the boundary for better symmetry, while another redefines what constitutes a valid throw with the casual authority of a man who has never thrown anything. Heavier than a scroll, you join the crowd of athletes, some massaging sore arms, others practicing half-hearted swings with imaginary weights. Euenos, always the expert, lists famous discus throwers and their supposed secret techniques, none of which seem to involve actual training. Minos tests his throwing arm, wincing with each movement, but insisting that pain is a sign the gods remember you. Lysandros cracks his knuckles, eyes narrowed, studying the wind with the intensity of a ship's captain facing a coming storm. The discus is first. You take your place in the line, watching as the favorites are announced, and the order of throws is decided by drawing lots, flipping a coin, or, as it happens today, letting the judge's youngest nephew pick names from a basket. The disc itself is heavy, smooth, and cold, its surface scored by years of desperate palms. You heft it and feel, not strength, but a sudden uncertainty. Where is the boundary between technique and luck? The first thrower, a man built like a marble statue, spins once, twice, and sends the discus soaring, the crowd erupting as it lands far beyond the previous year's mark. Cheers follow, then laughter as the next competitor slips, hurling his discus sideways into a tangle of reeds. The judges confer, one marking the sand with a stick, the other muttering about spirit and effort. Your turn comes sooner than you hoped. You grip the discus, feel its reluctant weight, and remember every cautionary tale about dislocated shoulders. You spin, you throw, you watch the discus wobble through the air and land with an unremarkable thud, neither disgraceful nor record breaking. The judges nod. It counts, and for now, that is enough. Manus fares worse, his throw barely clearing the line, prompting a debate about whether he actually threw or simply dropped the disc in a forward direction. Lysandros, predictably, does better. His throw is long, clean, and punctuated by a low growl of satisfaction. Euenos claims to have calculated the wind's speed, then promptly overshoots the field and nearly strikes a group of spectators who react with well practiced outrage. Next comes the javelin. Here the rituals begin anew. Men test the straightness of the shaft, debate the best grip, and mumble last minute prayers. The rules are explained again, as if repetition could make them any less ambiguous. The boundary is redrawn twice before the event begins, with the judges finally agreeing on a line that, to your eye, seems entirely arbitrary. The javelin feels lighter than the discus, but more unpredictable, a reminder that at its core, this event was born from the need to throw things at distant enemies. You watch as the favorites launch their javelins in long, elegant arcs, the weapons slicing through the air before burying themselves in the ground. The crowd cheers, the judges mark the spots, and the process repeats with the regularity of disappointment. Your throw is nothing special. The javelin leaves your hand with a satisfying whoosh, sails for a few precious moments, then buries itself well short of the leading mark. There is no shame. Most are worse, a few better. One poor soul releases his too early, and it lands at his own feet, earning him a new nickname and a round of laughter that lingers long after the contest moves on. By midday, the sun is merciless and every arm aches. Bread and water are handed out, and the athletes gather in the shade, comparing techniques and blaming the wind. There is talk of next year, of better training, of learning from today's failures. No one mentions quitting, not openly at least. The results are posted on a battered board, names scratched beside numbers that mean little to anyone outside Olympia. Victors preen, losers grumble, and the judges retire to their tent to debate who will be remembered and who will be forgotten. You sit with your companions, grateful that for one more day you have endured. The discus and the javelin have demanded your best, and if your best was ordinary, it was, at least, enough to keep you in the story. As dusk falls, you watch the last light fade from the field, knowing that, like all things in Olympia, glory is fleeting, and the next test is already waiting. There is a peculiar agony that comes not from running or wrestling, not from being thrown or trampled, but from waiting. The contests are done for the day. Your arms, legs, and back all sing their familiar chorus of complaint. But as the sun drops toward the horizon, your mind becomes the real battleground. The judges have retreated into their tent, dragging their ledgers, scrolls, and the day's meager offerings behind them. The rest of you are left in limbo, wondering which names will be scratched into history and which into oblivion. The field, so noisy and chaotic only hours before, is eerily quiet now. Athletes gather in small, uneasy knots, some nursing wounds, some rehearsing explanations for the folks at home. The victors huddle apart, speaking in low voices, already practicing the faces they will wear at the closing ceremony. The losers sit together, resigned to their fates, exchanging theories about how the judges decide such things. Bread is broken, water passed around. The meal tastes like dust and suspense. The judges, never hurried, take their time. Each contest must be reviewed, each score debated, each minor infraction discussed, as if the fate of the world hangs in the balance. Uenos, whose patience is as thin as his body, tries to eavesdrop near the tent and returns with nothing but a headache and the news that they're arguing over the difference between a step and a leap. Lysandro suggests that next year the games should include a contest for patience, if only to see who survives the judges' speeches. You watch as scraps of papyrus are carried from one official to another, as priests wander in and out with messages, and as the crowd of spectators grows restless, children chase each other between the tents, merchants loudly offer their remaining wares, and a goat, uninvited as always, manages to eat half of a discarded laurel wreath before being chased away by a boy with more enthusiasm than authority. Rumors blossom in the vacuum. Some claim that a favorite has been disqualified for a technicality. Others whisper that an obscure rule will change the entire outcome of the discus. Uenos insists he heard one judge say that effort should count for something, prompting a debate about whether a heroic failure is better than a mediocre win. For every story, there is a contradiction. For every certainty, a doubt. Olympia, you learn, is a city that thrives on ambiguity. As night falls, a torch is lit by the judge's tent, a signal that the results are coming, but not, of course, how soon. You sit with the others, sharing stories not of victory, but of waiting. The runner who fell asleep before the announcement of his own win, the wrestler who missed his prize because he was in the healer's tent, the champion who discovered, too late, that his laurel wreath had already been claimed by a hungry goat. At last, the judges emerge. They do not hurry. Each carries a list and a look of mild irritation, as if the act of recording history is beneath them. The names are read in a monotone, victors announced first, to polite applause and the occasional shout of triumph, then the lesser places, then, finally, the honorable mentions, those who did not win, but did not quite lose badly enough to be ignored. You strain to hear your name. When it finally comes, it is mangled beyond recognition, but it is there, listed in a category so vague, notable effort in the javelin, that you are unsure whether to feel proud or pitied. The ceremonies are brief. Laurel wreaths are handed out, sometimes to the right man, sometimes to the one standing closest. A few small prizes, a jug of oil, a loaf of sweetened bread, are distributed with as much ceremony as the moment allows. There are speeches from the judges, all variations on the same theme: the importance of effort, the glory of the games, the value of accepting one's place. You listen, nod, and wonder how much of this will be remembered once the tents are gone and the fields return to silence. When it is over, the crowd disperses. The victors are swarmed by admirers and opportunists. The rest drift back to their beds or to the fire where stories are retold, disappointments softened by laughter, and the simple relief of knowing that, at least, the waiting is done. As you lie down that night, aches and bruises settling into place, you reflect on what you have learned. The games are not about certainty or justice, not about unbroken victories or perfect moments. They are about enduring the in between, the waiting, the hoping, the quietly persistent belief that being present, being counted, matters more than the outcome. You close your eyes, already halfway to sleep, and think, tomorrow the games will end. One more ceremony, one more chance to pretend at glory, and then home. Whatever the judges decided, whatever the crowd remembers, you will carry the experience with you, dust, bruises, and all. Morning finds Olympia draped in a hush, the kind that comes not from reverence, but from exhaustion. Athletes move slowly, as if gravity has grown heavier overnight. There is little conversation, words are rationed, energy saved for the final act, the ceremonial closing. Even the goats seem subdued, picking through the refuse of the festival in search of something left unguarded. You eat breakfast without appetite, more ritual than nourishment. Bread, olives, and a sour taste in your mouth that refuses to be washed away. Around you, the last of the trainers pace the encampment, offering final instructions no one will remember. The judges confer near the stadium, faces grim, voices low. The priests rehearse their invocations for the 100th time, pinning their hopes on perfect phrasing to distract from imperfect results. The closing ceremony is not a celebration so much as a reckoning. The stadium, so recently filled with noise and striving, is now the scene of a different kind of performance. The parade of the battered, the disappointed, the quietly triumphant. You line up with the other athletes, victors, losers, and everyone in between. Each of you asked to appear dignified, each of you wondering whether dignity is just another word for surviving embarrassment. The crowd has thinned, but remains persistent. Spectators huddle together against the morning chill, voices subdued, enthusiasm faded to politeness. Children pick over discarded laurel wreaths, looking for the ones least trampled. Merchants hawk their final wares at desperate discounts, hoping for a last sale before the long walk home. The air is thick with the sense of spent incense, sweat, and the unmistakable undertone of disappointment. The procession begins. One by one, athletes are called forward, not for the speed of their sprint or the distance of their throw, but for the simple fact of enduring. Names are mispronounced, titles mangled, achievements diluted by repetition. The judges hand out laurel wreaths with a formality that feels both heavy and hollow. Yours comes with a nod and a look that suggests the judge can no longer tell you apart from the other bruised bodies in line. Priests recite prayers to the gods, asking for favor in future games and forgiveness for any slights, real or imagined, committed during this one. Sacrifices are offered at the altar: a loaf of bread, a jug of oil, a bird whose opinion on the proceedings remains unrecorded. The crowd joins in a hymn, voices ragged, the melody rising above the stadium and drifting away on the breeze, as indifferent as the gods themselves. The victors are celebrated, though even their triumph feels muted. Some smile with pride, others look quietly relieved, and a few simply look hungry. Their wreaths are slightly fresher, their prizes a bit larger, but you sense that their thoughts are already turning homeward, toward retelling their victories in ways that grow with each telling. For the rest, the closing is a kind of release. You stand with your fellow competitors, exchanging nods, handshakes, and half hearted congratulations. There is talk of journeys ahead, of returning to families, of slipping back into ordinary life with stories that may never quite match the grandeur promised by Olympic legend. The judges, having dispensed their last wreath, deliver speeches about the eternal spirit of the games, the glory of competition, and the honor of participation. You listen politely, knowing that the true glory lies less in triumph than in the sheer endurance required to reach this point. There is a moment of silence for the fallen, those who could not finish, those who left with injuries, those whose names will fade before the dust settles. The fire at the altar is allowed to burn low, its smoke mingling with the afternoon haze. The ceremony ends not with cheers, but with the slow, scattered applause of people grateful that something, anything, is finished. Athletes drift away in ones and twos, some lingering for final farewells, others vanishing without a word. The stadium empties, the crowd disperses, and Olympia begins its slow return to anonymity. You wander back to your hut, collecting your few belongings: a tunic, a sandal, a lucky pebble, a handful of memories equal parts pride and regret. Outside, the village is already changing. Tents are struck, goods are packed, and the first travelers set out down the dusty road, their laughter echoing off empty fields. In the quiet that follows, you feel the strange ache of history moving on without you. The games are over, the glory, such as it was, faded. What remains is the soreness in your limbs, the dust on your skin, and the knowledge that you walked, ran, and fell where legends once stood. You are not immortalized in song. Your story will not be chiseled in stone. But for a few days, you were part of something bigger, even if history will not care. You fall asleep early, the sounds of departure drifting through your dreams. Tomorrow, the world will return to its old patterns, indifferent to your small part in its endless cycle. The games have ended, and with them, your brief brush with the machinery of legend. The games are over. The stadium is deserted, the sacred fires little more than memory and ash. You wake to a different world, a world not changed by your exploits, but one that has simply moved forward without you. The first light creeps across your straw mat, turning the dust motes golden. Around you, the hut is nearly empty, abandoned in stages by your fellow athletes, each one eager to put distance between themselves and Olympia's indifferent gods. Your limbs are stiff, your feet still bruised, your mind weighed down with a strange blend of fatigue and restlessness. There is no breakfast today, only the remains of yesterday's bread and the stale aftertaste of ambition. You dress slowly, careful not to wake Theodoros, who mumbles in his sleep, clutching his last olive pit like a relic. Packing is simple. You own nothing of value, unless you count the laurel wreath that now looks as battered as you feel. You gather your meager belongings, sandals more whole than leather, a tunic heavy with sweat, the lucky pebble you nearly swallowed in a moment of nerves. These things are less mementos than reminders. The journey, the pain, the stories that only you will remember in their true form. Outside, the village is in retreat. Tents are vanishing, carts are loaded, the last merchants hurl curses at stubborn buyers. The priests, always the last to leave, circle the empty stadium, collecting what the crowd left behind: scraps of food, lost trinkets, the odd offering missed by the gods. The judges are nowhere to be seen. Perhaps they are already drafting new rules for next year, or perhaps they simply slipped away, their ledgers as incomplete as their promises. The road home is longer than you recall, or perhaps your body is simply more honest now. The group you traveled with to Olympia has splintered, each man lost in his own thoughts, replaying triumphs, justifying losses, inventing excuses for wounds both visible and hidden. You walk mostly in silence, conversation coming only in short, practical bursts. Which way to turn at the fork? How many days' walk to the next town? Whether anyone remembers the taste of wine or the softness of a real bed. It is on this road, far from the shouts and ceremonies, that the true weight of the games settles in. You remember the faces of the defeated, the quiet pride of the victors, the empty comfort of rituals and rules. You remember the stories told around the fire, the dreams that faltered at the starting line, the promises made to gods who seemed always too busy elsewhere. You remember the brief moments, laughter under an olive tree, a hand lifted in help, the strange camaraderie of pain shared without words. As the days pass and the dust rises behind you, the world becomes ordinary again. Fields are tilled, markets open, the hum of daily life drowns out the memory of the stadium's roar. Family and neighbors greet you with polite interest, some feigned, some genuine. They ask about the games, but listen only for victories, not for what it costs to compete. You tell them what they want to hear: the thrill of the race, the glory of the struggle, the honor of representing your city. You leave out the rest, the nights of doubt, the moments of terror, the invisible wounds that linger long after the body has healed. Your laurel wreath dries out and crumbles. The oil stains never quite leave your tunic, and your lucky pebble finds its way to the bottom of a drawer. In time, even the ache in your bones fades, replaced by the quiet aches of ordinary life. Bad harvests, restless children, the slow work of growing older. Yet something remains. Some mornings, you wake before dawn and remember the feel of the Olympia dust beneath your feet, the sound of the crowd as you stumbled across the line, the simple, defiant joy of still being there at the end. You find yourself running in dreams, never fast enough, never certain of the finish, but always moving forward. The story of your time at the games is not one you tell often. It does not fit neatly into legend or lesson. It is a patchwork of little victories and private shames, of the way the sun looked as you waited for your name, of the bread you broke with strangers who became brothers for a few short days. In the end, history will not remember you. The games will go on, the victors' names will be carved in stone, and the world will turn. But you remember, and perhaps that is enough. You are, after all, part of history, not the part sung by poets or celebrated by crowds, but the part written quietly, with every weary step, every breathless finish, every promise kept only to yourself. The games are over, but you carry their dust with you, a silent proof that you lived, you endured, and for a moment you walked where legends once ran.